When you hear the name Rasputin, what comes to mind? A crazy mystic who could predict the future? Maybe a powerful sorcerer with supernatural abilities, or perhaps a charlatan who pretended to have special powers? What if I told you that this man really did have a gift? And when it comes to gifts, I don't mean the ability to perform miracles. No, Rasputin's real power was his gift of gab. Put simply, the man knew how to talk. In fact, the first time Nicholas II met him, he was so taken aback by Rasputin's charisma that he said, "I am the most skeptical person in the world, but you know there are people whose sincerity is disarming." This meeting between a desperate monarch and an opportunistic mystic would change Russia forever. But before we get into all that, let's take a look at where Rasputin came from, shall we? Born in 1869 to poor peasant parents in Siberia, young Gregory would have had few opportunities in life unless he had something extraordinary to set him apart from the crowd. So what was that something? Was it his ability to heal? Maybe, but more likely it was his silver tongue. There are many stories about Rasputin's supposed healing abilities. In one incident, Rasputin supposedly saved a woman from drowning. However, this story is not found in any official documents and is instead reported by someone named Vladimir Purishkevich, who had a personal vendetta against Rasputin. After hearing about the supposed drowning incident, Prince Felix Yusupov went to see Rasputin to confirm it. But when he arrived, Rasputin showed him a letter from the grateful woman's husband thanking him for saving his wife. Not exactly proof that Rasputin was a miracle worker, but it shows that Rasputin knew how to make people feel better, both physically and emotionally. There's also the time Rasputin supposedly saved Alexei, the son of Nicholas II, from a near-fatal nosebleed. Again, the story goes that Rasputin entered the room and performed some sort of miracle, stopping the bleeding and making Alexei feel better. While this story seems more plausible, there's still no hard evidence to support it. What we do know is that Rasputin built up a reputation as a faith healer, which led him to be invited to the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg to meet with the royal family. His first audience with Nicholas II was not a huge success, but when he laid hands on Alexandra to cure her of a headache, she experienced immediate relief. This impressed her greatly, and soon Rasputin was invited back to the palace to meet with the entire family. It wasn't long before Rasputin became a fixture in the royal court, much to the annoyance of many courtiers. Despite their skepticism towards Rasputin, they had to admit that he seemed to have a positive influence on the Tsarina. It seemed as though Rasputin was like a breath of fresh air in the stuffy winter palace. While other courtiers were focused on titles and status, Rasputin didn't care about any of that. He treated everyone, regardless of their status, with respect and dignity. Plus, he was just a lot of fun to be around. This made him very popular with the children, especially Alexei, who idolized Rasputin. When Alexei was out playing, he would often pretend to be Rasputin, complete with a fake beard. Unfortunately, not everyone in the royal court shared Alexei's enthusiasm for the Siberian monk. The first person to openly criticize Rasputin was Grand Duke Paul Alexandrovich. He warned his brother Nicholas that Rasputin was nothing but a fraud. However, his warnings fell on deaf ears. Perhaps Nicholas was too trusting, or maybe he was simply desperate for a miracle worker who could cure his son's hemophilia. Whatever the reason, Nicholas continued to invite Rasputin to the palace despite the criticism. Eventually, Paul got so fed up with Rasputin that he decided to take matters into his own hands. On July 1914, he confronted Rasputin in his own home and shot him twice. The first shot missed, but the second one hit its mark. Rasputin staggered back, clutching his chest before collapsing onto the floor. As he lay there dying, he reportedly said, "This is retribution. You may murder me, but I shall come back to you again." True to his word, Rasputin's body was recovered from the river. It was wrapped in lead and buried in a remote location, yet somehow he managed to return. His return was even more dramatic than before. Soon after being shot, Rasputin began to appear at parties in St. Petersburg. People were shocked to see that he was alive and well, seemingly unaffected by the gunshot wound. Some believed that Rasputin was immortal, others thought he was a spy. But in reality, he was just lucky. The bullet had only grazed him, leaving a small scar on his chest. This didn't stop Paul from trying to kill him again, though. Just a few weeks later, Paul confronted Rasputin once again. This time he beat him with a stick until he was covered in blood. Again, Rasputin survived and returned to the Winter Palace to continue his work as a healer. Clearly, Rasputin was not only tenacious, but he also had quite a bit of nerve. Meanwhile, Paul's attempts to kill Rasputin only made him more popular. People began to see him as a martyr who had been persecuted for his beliefs. Plus, it gave Rasputin an excuse to distance himself from the royal family, which was good news for Nicholas. As Rasputin's popularity grew, so did his influence over the Tsarina. She came to rely on him for help with everything, from choosing ministers to running the country. This made many courtiers extremely uncomfortable. They felt that Rasputin was a dangerous influence over the weak-willed Tsarina. For example, Lady Alexandra Dantam-Shay witnessed firsthand how Rasputin's influence grew. At first, the Tsarina would only consult him about Alexei's illness, but later, Rasputin started attending cabinet meetings and giving orders to ministers. Even Nicholas seemed to be under Rasputin's spell. According to Dantam-Shay, Nicholas became increasingly distant and aloof. He neglected his duties as emperor and spent more time with Rasputin than with his own family. Despite the growing tension in St. Petersburg, Rasputin remained popular among the masses. He was seen as a holy man who brought hope to a hopeless situation. For example, when World War I broke out, many Russians turned to Rasputin for guidance. He reportedly told them that Russia would win the war, but only if they remained faithful to their Orthodox Christian beliefs. This message of hope and faith resonated with many people and helped to maintain Rasputin's popularity. Unfortunately, Rasputin's influence over the Tsarina would eventually lead to his downfall. While she initially relied on him for help with Alexei's illness, she later began to depend on him for help with everything. This included choosing government ministers and even running the country. This made many courtiers extremely uncomfortable as they felt that Rasputin was a dangerous influence over the weak-willed Tsarina. Despite the growing tension in St. Petersburg, Rasputin remained popular among the masses. He was seen as a holy man who brought hope to a hopeless situation. For example, when World War I broke out, many Russians turned to Rasputin for guidance. He reportedly told them that Russia would win the war, but only if they remained faithful to their Orthodox Christian beliefs. This message of hope and faith resonated with many people and helped to maintain Rasputin's popularity. However, Rasputin's growing influence over the Tsarina would eventually lead to his downfall. While she initially relied on him for help with Alexei's illness, she later began to depend on him for help with everything. This included choosing government ministers and even running the country. This made many courtiers extremely uncomfortable, as they felt that Rasputin was a dangerous influence over the weak-willed Tsarina. Despite the growing tension in St. Petersburg, Rasputin remained popular among the masses. He was seen as a holy man who brought hope to a hopeless situation. For example, when World War I broke out, many Russians turned to Rasputin for guidance. He reportedly told them that Russia would win the war, but only if they remained faithful to their Orthodox Christian beliefs. This message of hope and faith resonated with many people and helped to maintain Rasputin's popularity. But ultimately, it was this very popularity that would lead to his demise. On December 1916, a group of nobles invited Rasputin to a party at the Yusupov Palace. They had no intention of letting him leave alive. Before arriving at the party, Rasputin was given poison, but he survived. Then he was shot 5 times, but he still lived. Finally, the nobles beat him to death with a cane. And that's the true story of Rasputin. Thanks for watching. Bye.